Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today I'm going to take a look at Panic Station, which is probably the most anticipated of White Goblin Games' upcoming releases for the 2011 Spiel Convention, and truly a unique take on the genre of deduction games that have been made so popular by some of the more recent titles like The Resistance and Battlestar Galactica. Panic Station is a paranoia-driven cooperative game in which each player controls two members of a government core team sent to investigate the presence of an alien life form within a military compound, with the goal being to explore and gather equipment that will assist the team in destroying the parasite hive that is hidden somewhere deep inside the location. However, within the game's first few rounds, one player will become the host, and in doing so he must try to keep his identity a secret from the team while infecting as many of its members as possible in order to gain allies and ultimately prevent the humans from completing their mission. This is definitely one of the most enjoyable, thought-provoking thematic deduction games out there, and will keep players guessing who they can and cannot trust right up until the end. So let's take a brief look at the game's components and setup. At the start of the game, each player receives two character cards and two corresponding tokens of a chosen color, which represent that player's android and trooper personas, both of which have unique tactical abilities within the game. Now, these two characters will represent the only two personas that a particular player may control for the remainder of the game, and if at any time both of the player's characters are killed, that player will be permanently eliminated. Each player will also receive 3 infection cards of their chosen color, which will be added to their initial hand, but may only be used to infect other players with the parasite virus once they themselves have been infected by the host. Players will also receive 2 check cards that will be placed off to the side of the play area and will only be used during heat scans, one of which represents a positive scan for the parasite virus and the other being a negative scan. Players will then place the reactor room in the center of the table, which forms the starting location and entry point into the base for all the players. Next, each player will receive 1 gas can and 1 randomly drawn card from the top of the search deck to add to their already existing hand of 3 infection cards, forming their initial hand of 5 total cards. Now, once this is completed, the host card, which will represent the singular host player in the game, will be seated and shuffled into a randomly drawn number of search cards that is equal to twice the number of participating players. Then that stack will be placed on the top of the rest of the existing search deck. As mentioned in the introduction, whenever this host card is secretly drawn by a specific player through the course of searching the various rooms throughout the base, that player will become the parasite host for the remainder of the game, and will be charged with infecting the rest of the players before they can complete their mission of destroying the hive cocoon. Speaking of the hive, this location as well as the open terminal room will be removed from the location deck at the start of the game, both of which will likewise be shuffled and seated into the bottom portion of the exploration deck to be discovered in the later parts of the game. Once a starting player is randomly determined, the game can finally begin. Before we discuss the turn sequence used in Panic Station, let's briefly touch on the 2 character cards that each player will control throughout the game. As I previously mentioned, each player will have at their disposal 1 trooper and 1 android character, both of which do share some common iconography between the two, although each will serve their own specific utility or purpose in the game. The common portions of both characters are that each has 4 total hit points, which are denoted by the hearts around the character's picture and will fluctuate as the game progresses, as well as a combined number of action points that they provide to the player depending upon how many hit points they currently have available, being either 1 or 2 action points per character. Where the 2 characters differ, though, is how they will be used throughout the game. As the mission states, the players will be charged with destroying the hive cocoon, and the only way to do so is to get there with 1 of their trooper tokens and 3 gas cards in hand, because they are the only characters who can fulfill this mission by burning out the hive. However, because of this, they are left extremely vulnerable to attack, so they must be defended by the androids, who happen to be the only characters who may utilize firearms in the game, which will become incredibly important as players begin to come under attack from both parasites and other infected players. Now, there are a lot of actions going on in a typical turn sequence, so I will describe just the basics of the gameplay here so that I can at least give everyone a general feel for how the game plays out. Turns are handled in two basic phases, which are called the parasite phase and the team phase. The parasite phase happens just once at the start of each round and requires the start player to roll the die, move any parasite tokens on the board according to that roll, and attack each and every character in the room for 1 or 2 damage depending upon the level of the parasites that are within the same room as any character tokens. Now, this is the primary way that players will take damage in the early parts of the game and will become a real threat later when players have the dual responsibility of defending both against the parasites and infected players. The team phase happens in clockwise order around the table, with each player taking a turn. Now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of different options and actions that a player has at their disposal during their turn. However, what they can do is limited by the number of combined action points that are available to them. These combined action points are directly related to the amount of hit points that the player's 2 characters currently have and will range anywhere between 1 to 4 total action points. What's important to understand here, though, is that it does not matter which of these 2 characters provides that number of action points, meaning they can spend these action points as they so choose, either using them all on one character or dividing them in some combination amongst the 2. Therefore, it's very important to keep your characters as healthy as possible throughout the game so they can provide the maximum number of actions and options available to the players. Now, once again, as I previously mentioned, there are a lot of actions that a player may do on their turn. In fact, there are 7 total actions, each of which cost 1 action point apiece. And I'm not going to go into detail on each of them, but they include the following options, which are exploring new locations, moving a token throughout the base, firing a weapon at a parasite or another character, searching a location, activating a computer terminal, healing in a sick bay, or using an item that requires an action point. All of these things are incredibly important to balance throughout the game, but the most important gameplay mechanic in all of this to remember is what actually makes the game so intriguing to play, and that is how infection works or is carried from one player to the next once a host is infected himself. And this is because every time that you move from one location in the base to another location that is occupied by another player's character token, you are forced to secretly trade one card from your hand for another card from that player, or at least one other player in that location. This is the true beauty in the game and provides the increasing level of paranoia that makes the game so compelling to play. Again, players must trade one card with at least one other player in a location that they move to, allowing them, if infected themselves, to pass one of their infection cards to that player and infecting them in the process. The receiving player does have an option, though, and if they believe that this player is trying to infect them, they are allowed to pass, once again in secret, one of their gas cans to that player who moved into their location, effectively burning out the infection and saving them for the time being from becoming a parasite host themselves. This is exactly the cat and mouse gameplay that takes place mentally from round to round, as players are constantly second guessing both who and who is not infected. But players are not left entirely in the dark, as table talk is always allowed in the game, and the use of computer terminals that are randomly seated throughout the base will allow the group as a whole to see the total number of infected players when scanned, so players will be better able to gauge their current level of success. Likewise, there are a lot of available items in the game that can be searched for and equipped and will assist the players in discovering and fending off the ever-increasing parasite threat within the base. This round structure will continue until one of 3 game-ending conditions are met, with a human win resulting with the hive cocoon being discovered and burnt out, and a host win occurring when all the players have become infected, or if only one human player is left alive and there are not enough gas cans available for him to burn out the hive. I'll make this very, very simple. Panic Station is a remarkably enjoyable thematic game that really does deliver on the hype by providing a very tense, paranoia-driven game that mirrors some of the best qualities of the most robust cooperative deduction-style games out there, but in a shorter time frame that makes it perfectly suited for being played in less than 1 hour. I have played the game 4 times now, and although I do feel that it is a little bit skewed towards the parasites, it's not entirely impossible for a strong group to overcome the challenges presented to them by a cunning host player. And in my limited experience with the game thus far, the record has been 2 human wins and 2 host wins, though both host wins were complete blowouts, and the human wins were incredibly tense nail-biters that came right down to the end. The only problem that I've had with the game thus far are that the rules, as initially written, do leave some questions that can be left up to interpretation. But after some light digging on the forums, most have been clearly answered up to this point. Despite this, Panic Station is one of those games that has to be played in person to truly appreciate what it attempts and does accomplish as both a game and as an experience. It takes a formula from a genre of games that has been seen many times before, but it condenses it into a shorter, more concentrated experience without having to lose all the meaty choices that make other titles in this category such standout products. And because of this, I personally feel that it delivers exactly what it set out to do, and that's to create an ever-increasing level of fear and anxiety in each of the players with every new round in the game. So that is Panic Station. I am Jeremy Salinas, and thank you very much for watching.